Thank you. Thank you. My name is Howard, and I am an alcoholic. I'm so glad to be here, and I've had such a good time with Steve since and Tim picked me up at the airport, and we didn't get lost. I'm always glad when that happens. And Steve, thank you very much, and anybody else that had anything to do with getting me invited out here. This is a big honor for me, and I'm grateful. I also wanted to mention Darren. Darren told me he was the best fisherman in Tennessee. Now, I wouldn't have told that if Scott Lee hadn't had to leave, but he left. And so I will say Darren said he was the best, because I know Scott Lee has told me he was. And I said to Darren, well, what's the biggest fish you ever caught? And he said, I caught a 26-pound bass. Oh, I said, well, I believe that because I was fishing and I caught a lantern. And I pulled it out of the river and it was still lit. He said, that's hard to believe. And I said, well, you cut 10 pounds off your fish, I'll blow my lantern out. So I want to thank all the other speakers. I slept this afternoon, so I missed some of them, but I've got feedback on them that they were exceptional. Sometimes you feel like you're going to make an exceptional talk. I'm not going to be able to do that, but I'm going to make an exceptionally long talk to make up for it. I don't know, it was over 10 years ago, because they tell me you can't get invited back in 10 years, but 10 years, whenever I was here before, I started my talk, and I just said that I'm Howard, an alcoholic, and my sobriety date is August the 4th, 1972, and I'm about to do what I love to do the most, which is share my story. But I said, I know I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's Saturday night. So I know I can't be far from the Grand Ole Opry. And I am an Opry fan. And my dad had a country band. And the next Tuesday, that was all. And then I told my story just the way I'm going to tell it. Probably exactly the word for word, the same story. And the next Tuesday, I got a call from this deep Southern voice guy. I recognized it immediately, and he said, I'm a publicist, and I do some publicity for people in the country business, and you mentioned the Grand Ole Opry. And a friend of mine, a producer named Larry Black, is going to produce a series of videos entitled The Opry Family Reunion. And he gave me laminate passes, all access passes for you. I tell you. And not only that, as a publicist, he gave me a little assignment, which was to get everybody's autograph. And you know who got it. So I still have that in my office. Ever how long ago that was. So I really, it was just one of the big times of my life. And every time I come to Nashville, I'm always welcome. I know a lot of you guys, particularly because we have men's stags that we come to. And anyway, this is a thrill for me. And I love Steve, and I'm very grateful that he was my host. I'm also grateful that he can use that phone map because we needed it bad. He took me out in the most beautiful mountain country yesterday to look at Barbara Mandel's little log cabin. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I think it's 40,000 square foot little log cabin. So anyway, I've had a great time. Thank you for having me. I don't see the clock, but I want you to know I have my wristwatch here, and I look at it. I don't look at it to see what time it is, though. I look at it to give those of you that are worried about it a sense of optimism. That I care what time it is. I do not care. Fact is, now is when my time starts. I also, in my talk, make up stuff and say that it's in the big book. And I give page numbers. And I just make it up. But it adds credibility to my talk. I hear people after the meeting saying, well, he didn't give much of a talk, but boy, he sure knows that big book, doesn't he? You know? So 1,000 years ago, I was born in Los Angeles, California. Don't ever remember as a kid being in Los Angeles, but I love it that I was born there. But I was raised in a small town about 45 miles southwest of Wichita, Kansas, in what we called the Bible Belt. Now, we didn't know that everybody thinks that they are in the Bible Belt. The people in Texas, Oklahoma, that's really not true, not everybody. The people in Los Angeles know they are not in the Bible Belt, and they're tickled to death about that. They do not want to be in the Bible Belt. In this little town, my dad had a barber shop and a shoe repair shop, and the merchants there would put on a free movie on Saturday nights to bring the farmers in to our town to do business with our grocery store and stuff. And I watched this free movie one night about, there was always a cartoon, a short feature, and the main feature. 3 movies for free. And the short feature that night, one night, was training wild elephants in India. Very interesting story. And they took the baby elephants out of the herd, and the way they trained them was to put a rope around, that's the way it started, they put a rope around their right front leg and then snubbed them up to a tree. And they'd pull and tug. They had been free to travel with the herd, and now they couldn't get loose. And they fought and fought until they came to believe that when the rope's tight, it's futile to pull. And once they learned that, and the trainers saw they learned that, then they went ahead with the rest of their training. But all the rest of their lives and all the rest of their training reinforced this belief that when the rope is tight, it's futile to pull. So at the end of the movie, a huge elephant pulled a tree, was dragging trees out, trimmed up, but drug them out of the forest for harvest. And at the lunch break, to keep the elephant where they wanted it, they drove a relatively short stake in the ground, put a rope around his right front leg, and tied that other end of the rope to the stake. And it could walk around any place in the area, but when it hit the end of the rope and the rope got tight, it couldn't pull against the tight rope. The stake didn't hold the elephant. The rope didn't hold the elephant. What held the elephant was the limiting belief they imposed on him when he was a baby. I come to Alcoholics Anonymous with approximately 104,000 baby elephant beliefs just like that. Stuff that I was taught that wasn't necessarily true, but I believed it. And if you believe it, it has to be true if you're going to feel good. And I was taught which is fine, but I was taught that I was separate from God. Now, nobody said you're separate from God, but they said God is up in heaven, behind the pearly gates on the streets of gold, and you're in this little farm town. So I'm a bright guy, a kid, I'm separate. If they'd have said he was in Wichita, I'd have known that I was separate. And they said if you would behave the way God wants you to behave, and there was plenty of them that knew what to tell me about what God wanted me to do, and I never got the hang of doing what God wanted me to do. But if you would have, and then you get in trouble in life, you could fervently pray to God to help you. But if you had not done what God wanted you to, He wasn't going to answer the prayer. Now, I remember the first time that I knew who I was praying to and what I was praying for. It was Sunday morning, and wheat harvest started tomorrow. It would have started today. The wheat was ripe today, but it was Sunday. And we prayed for it not to rain until after wheat harvest. It was essential that we do that because God doesn't know when it should rain and when it doesn't. If you tell Him, you got to tell Him. So we told Him, and that afternoon it rained. We prayed for it not to, but it did. And it hailed. And the wind blew and destroyed all the wheat in Sumner County, Kansas. And while nobody pointed the finger at me, I knew whose fault it was. And if you're 5 or 6 years old and you assume the entire responsibility for wiping out the Kansas wheat crop, what you have is an ego problem. The old basing the sense of well-being, ease and comfort on your ability to make things happen that you lack the power to make happen. And I had that. I knew that you needed to win the competition. You needed to be the best or the boss so that you could have money, property, and prestige, and then feel good. But all that had to happen, and I didn't feel good. And all that had to happen before I could feel good. And that works for about 90% of the people. But there's about 10% of us who are spring-loaded biochemically to be afraid and to be angry. We're in the top 90% in terms of the neurotransmitters that activate the fight or flight center. And we're in the bottom 50% in terms of abundance of dopamine and serotonin, which activates the pleasure center. So what we're doing when we try to win the competition is shoveling sand against the tide, or whatever you shovel. But you don't feel good, you know. The best feeling I had was a sense of low-grade alert that, well, it's all right now, but something bad's going to happen very quickly, you know. Just the old feelings of impending calamity. And that was it until I was about 12 years old. And I drank my first half a pint of whiskey. And like I hear so many times, for the first time, I knew what it was like to feel good. That felt good. And I remember thinking that. And I remember thinking, this is what they mean when they say, let's go have a few drinks and be somebody. You know, I not only felt good, I was somebody. I was a jerk, but I'll tell you, if you're a nothing and you become a jerk, you'd rather be a jerk. That's not what you're shooting for, but that was what I was, and I stayed that way. Now, when I was in the 7th grade, I fell in love with the greatest girl in town, and she was my girlfriend for about 2 or 3 weeks, but I didn't know. I know what happened though. Later on, I was reading a book by Joseph Campbell, and he explained what falling in love is and what it is. Now, I believe now that there's a spirit of the universe that underlies everything that exists, the totality of things. Well, that's almost everything. And I believe that. And when you fall in love, what happens is your spirit resonates with her spirit, and your spirits know they are one. And then for that love to get into your consciousness, it has to come up through your ego into your consciousness. And when mine got to my ego, when my feeling got to my ego said, I want to see her naked. Well, that just about ended the relationship right there. That did it for her, and she was always my friend, but not my girlfriend anymore. And because she didn't want no trouble, and I was trouble. I'm telling you, I was trouble full time. And called to the principals, all kinds of trouble. And she stayed pretty much, although she was always nice to me, she's nice to everybody. She's just a terrific red-headed girl. When I got out of high school, the Korean War started, and I joined the service, and I came home. My dad passed away. My dad was an alcoholic. And Mom had 6 kids in 8 years in depression. And 2 of them passed. Two of my sisters died before I was born, but Dad had a 7th grade education. He was an alcoholic. He wasn't who he wanted to be. And he told Mom, the reason I'm so much trouble is because my parents didn't discipline me. Well, he ain't going to make that mistake with me. I mean, if somebody would have told him, now, Polly, don't whip that kid like that. It'll be a traumatic thing for him. My dad would have thought, well, if he gets trauma, I'll whip that out of him, you know. And because he just whipped everything out of you. And frankly, I never got where I liked it. In Los Angeles, I understand. There's some people that like that. They hang each other up and whip them. I'm not that way at all. You whip me, and I'm not going to like it. I'll tell you that. And so, you know, Pat and I have been married 63 years now, and I'm happy about that. And not once in our 63 years did it ever occur to me to ask her if she'd like for me to whip her. I just assumed that if I don't like it, she won't like it. And that, I don't think I'm going to ask her. Don't tell her I said that. So, when my dad passed away, I went home, and Pat was engaged to this guy, and he had a bunch of, anyway, I didn't like him. And so they took me someplace, and man, that was a bad, you know, it was just a bad experience. And when I went back to my duty station, I said, I'm never going to go home again. It's just too painful. I'm going to stay in the service and not go back to Kansas. And then I heard that she had dumped him. I put in for leave that night. And because I never told her I loved her. And I went home, and it just like synchronicity, you know. She came and her dad loaned us his car, and we went dancing and just had a wonderful time. And I told her, you know, Pat, I've always loved you. And I've loved you with all my heart. And I probably am never, but I said, I'm not proposing or anything, but could we, you know, what I was thinking was before somebody else she falls for, I want to get my hat in the ring. But, and I did, and then we wrote, and we got married a month before I got out of the service, September the 22nd, 1953. So it'll soon be 63 years. And I have, gosh, I can tell you, I was so happy. This was my life, you know, now life was good. And I got out of the service and life was bad. After a short while, she was pregnant, and I'll tell you this, I never saw her naked till after we were married. And we had our son, our oldest son, 11 months after we were married, and it was so much pressure on me. I mean, it was, and I always tried to fake it, you know, how much, you know, how good I think, and I did not think I was good. I was living up, however, to my potential. I was potentially an alcoholic, and I lived right up to that. I fulfilled all of the requirements, and I drank to feel good. I drank to be somebody. I drank to have fun. I got a job as an entry-level engineer, and I drank so that I could write technical reports and so that I could do analyses my job title was process analyst. We analyzed processes. Yeah, the job titles now, I don't know what people do, but I know if you're a process analyst, what you do. And I was good at it only because when it came time to writing technical reports, I'd take them home and take a couple of drinks of whiskey, and it didn't get me drunk, it got me brilliant. And I discovered a technical vocabulary that I didn't even know I had. And when I was drinking, it was amazing how it just unblocked me so that I could write. And I went to, but I got a few, I was good, and so I got promoted, and I get more important assignments. And one of the assignments was to do an analysis of Atlas missile failures, and that was all secret. So I can't take that stuff home. So you go out to lunch, and you sharpen up at lunch, and then you come back and you analyze this data and write reports. So pretty soon you're doing it first thing in the morning. But I'm getting, and I remember when my dad joined AA, and I remember when he said that alcoholics were people that drank in the morning. So I knew that up until I drank in the morning. And after I started drinking, I didn't know why alcoholics drank in the morning, but I drank in the morning because I had a hangover, and it's the only way to get rid of it. It wasn't because they have anything to do with alcoholism, it's just something that you needed. And so life was going along pretty good, and my boss got talking to me about my speech being slurred when I come in at work at 7 o'clock in the morning. And you know, when I talk about synchronicity, that's how the world works. But you don't know it because you're not having your way. Nothing's working for you. But the world is working, but you ain't going to know it until you get sober and work the step. And I wasn't there yet. But at the Tattletale Bar, Tattletale Lounge, which was my drinking spot, there was a guy there that sold little white pills with crosses on them. He would stack them up and wrap them in tin foil, you know, and you look at that and you think, boy, those look like lifesavers. Those are lifesavers. Those are Benzedrine. We call them bennies. Bennies and booze together take care of all your problems except controlling some of your body functions. And if you take bennies with booze, you need some help there, I'm telling you. But it does cure the slurring of the speech. I'd go in 6 o'clock in the morning saying the same things over and over real fast, but there was never any slurring. So they demoted me. And I'm hopelessly in debt. I've run up bills, and I owe the credit union. I owe the credit union, and I'm not making enough money to pay all these bills. And Pat don't know we owe them. I owe the Bank of America. We had a Bank of America card before visas, and we had a Bank of America card, and I was over the limit on that thing until I went to the credit union and borrowed money and paid that down, because they're just going to do that once. Well, pretty soon, if you do that regularly, you're deeply in debt, more than you can pay. And I had an opportunity to sell some equipment that I didn't own. Equipment that the company I worked for lost right after I found it. And I gave it to a fence who's in the Tattletale, and he and the equipment disappeared. I never got any money for it, but I tell you, I went to the bar and said to the owner of the bar, hey, if anybody comes in looking for test equipment, I can get it for them. Which the next morning hit me as the dumbest thing I could have done. This test equipment is calibrated and gets recalled for recalibration. And when they call that equipment in, they're not going to find it. And so they tell security, we've lost this equipment. Security can't find anything. All they can do, like the U.S. government owned the equipment, and they can just fill out reports that go to the FBI. And I thought of this with a hangover. On July the 26th, 1972, I woke up on page 8 in the big book. No words can express the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretches out in every direction. Quicksand. Every place you go, your life is disintegrating. You're sinking, and there's no way to stop. Nothing to stop you. And my dad had died sober at an AA meeting, so I knew about AA. I knew there was an AA, and that they stopped drinking. And I thought, I'm going to go to AA and hang out. Pat will love this. You know, if I go to AA and just don't drink or control it better. But I got to get this stuff squared away. I'm a candidate for hard time in the federal penitentiary. If you heard Rick talk the other night, you know you don't want to be there. You don't want to go to jail. Now he went to jail 36 times, I think, before he made the big time. And I had been in jail twice, and that was all I wanted. So I'm going to stop drinking, and I called the guy that I thought was the president of Alcoholics Anonymous worldwide. I had drank in the tailhotel with him about 8 years ago. There's a guy named Kenny Sixberry, up until he joined AA and became the president worldwide, and he became Kenny S. And I called him and asked him if he was still in AA, and he said yes. I would not have called the vice president. I called the president, and he said yes. And I said, you know, I think I'd like to go with you sometime. He said, how about tonight? Oh, no, not tonight. I got tons of stuff to do tonight. I can't. But you know, he talked me into it, and he took me to the first meeting of AA that I went to. And it was a beginner's meeting, and they say, is anybody here in their first meeting? And my hand goes up. Now, this triggers the topic to be, what is an alcoholic, and how do they stop drinking? And you don't know, it's a setup, and they don't even look at you. They look and talk to each other, but they're talking to you. And they called on Chuck Ennis. So Chuck, he was the long timer, and said, Chuck, why don't you share on what an alcoholic is? Well, Chuck was an editor at MGM, and like you have country music here, we make movies in Culver City. And Chuck said, well, I used to go to the backstage bar after work on Mondays just to have one drink, and he said, next thing I know, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And they're throwing me out, and I'm arguing I got one more drink coming. And I thought, my God, that's happened to me quite often. You know, I get this, and he's going through this stuff, and then he says, I lost everything, I lost my job. He said, I came back, I came to AA, and I learned that my problem is I am an alcoholic. And you don't know he's got this right out of the big book, but he says, alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control their drinking. The loss of control is characterized by an insane, obsessive belief each time they start to drink that somehow, some way, this time it's going to be different. This time I'm going to stop by and just have one drink, 2, 3 at the most. And next thing you know, it's last call for alcohol. He said the reason for that is because coupled with this obsession that causes you to start drinking is a physical reaction peculiar to alcoholics as a class of people that manifests itself in a phenomenon of craving for more once they start to drink. A craving, he said, stronger than your willpower for you not to drink. So once you start, you go through the well-known stages of a spree. Whew, I thought, man, I thought there for a little bit I was an alcoholic, but I didn't know that alcoholics were people who, when they start to drink, are so weak-willed that they can't not keep drinking. And I, on the January the 1st, 1965, put out a cigarette. And I'll tell you, I said, that's my last cigarette. I'm not smoking another one. I'll tell you, 15 seconds later, you have a craving for a cigarette. And the longer you don't have one, the greater the craving is. And I haven't smoked one since the 1st of January, 1965, because I have willpower. And I put her out, and Pat was ready to divorce me and said, smoke for Christ's sake. Either smoke or get out of here. But I didn't smoke, and I stayed, and she let me. And so now I know that I'm not an alcoholic. I'm just not going to drink for a while until everything blows over. That lasted a week, and then I went to San Diego looking for a side job. There was a guy I knew down there that was looking for me for a side job, and I went down to get it, and I decided to test that. Now, Joe and Charlie, who many of you knew, Joe and Charlie used to say, once you start to drink, you don't know what happens to Willie Power. But Willie Power leaves and don't show up. And I'm telling you, I had never heard of Joe and Charlie. When I had that drink, Willie Power didn't show up. Whatever willpower I had said, let's have another drink. I mean, there was where the willpower went, was let's have another drink. I stayed drunk on the streets of San Diego for 4 days and 4 nights. I had a job, which I think I'd drunk my way out of. I had a family. I thought I'd lost them. And I was standing outside of a liquor store on the streets of San Diego, and I said to myself, you really are an alcoholic. You've lost your family, you've lost your job, you're hopelessly in debt, you're a candidate for hard time in a federal penitentiary. You've got to stop drinking, and you can't. I'm going to go to AA and see if I can stop drinking, if they can help me. Okay, that was August the 4th, 1972, and I haven't had to drink since then. And that isn't willpower. That's not willpower. That's surrender. You know, and surrender happened. I didn't know this. Didn't know it at the time. Didn't know what change there was. But surrender happens not in the intellect. Real surrender happens within you. So you know that of yourself. It's called humility. The ego is not familiar with it. That's why it don't know it. That you know you're beaten, and you know you can't do anything about it, and you ask for help, and the help is always there. That's the beginning. That's the essential beginning of any growth of a spiritual nature that we have in these programs. That's how they start. You don't know that. And the step is the first step is a wonderful way to keep that new neural pathway active. You disengage. I no longer, that I can remember, I had a lot of stress in my life and my job and everything when I first stopped drinking. My boss, I went to see my boss. I thought I'd lost the job. I went home, and Pat was glad to see me because she was worried about me. I had that bottle, and I said, "When this is going to be like that cigarette. When I drink this, I'm quitting." And she said, "Don't drink that till you see if you got a job." Well, I took it with me, and I had a few, and I went in, and it turned out that I had the job. And my boss, he started chewing me out, saying he's going to fire me. Well, I ain't going to take a chewing out and a firing too. I'm going out with my mouth flapping if this is it, you know. And I said, "Tom, I'm going to AA and I'm going to stop drinking. And if I stop drinking, I can get another job. Don't worry about me." And he said, "I hope you do go to AA, and I hope you stop drinking, and I hope you don't get polio. I hope you don't break your leg. I hope you don't wreck your car. I hope nothing happens to you that makes you so much as late for work again. And don't ever call me and tell me you're sick. You come in, and I will tell you if you're sick." Is that all right? That, you know, that was a terrific EAP program for me. We didn't. I tell you, we didn't have EAP programs back then, but he had one, and that was it. You'd show up, and I'd be doing something, and I'd throw the pencil, and then later he would act like he didn't notice. Later he'd say, "You're really doing good. I'm proud of you." You know, and I was doing terrible. I had terrible stress, and I went through a whole series of things. I was going to get a new wife, or I was going to get a new job, and I was going to kill myself, and that's a real surrender. But if this is as good as life gets, I said to myself, and I'm sober, then life isn't worth it. And I was driving to an AA meeting on a Pacific Coast Highway, and across the street was, and anyway, I knew there was a flatbed semi-trailer there with no truck hooked to it. It was just sitting there. I don't know if it was a broken axle, but it was just sitting there. And I went up and turned around, and I was coming down Pacific Coast Highway, opening up, and I was going to run into that thing and do away with myself. It wasn't going to take long, and I was going. And Pat gets double indemnity, and I haven't left any messages or anything. But a voice comes to me, a thought came to me, and the thought was, "It's all right with the universe if you do this." But the universe don't know if you have fulfilled your purpose in life until you die. And if you killed yourself, it knows you didn't fulfill your purpose and you got to start all over again. Man, I straightened that thing out. You know, I drove careful, and I went back to the AA meeting. And after that, you see, the reason I said it was a surrender, because I always knew that ain't the answer. And eventually, if you gradually learn, well, that wouldn't be the answer, and that wouldn't be it. All that's left is the steps. Now, I wasn't going to work the steps. I would go into meetings, and I'd listen, and if you said something good, I was going to add that to my program. And one of you said, brooding, if you make a mistake and brood about making a mistake, then you've made two mistakes. And the brooding is generally the worst consequence of the man. Well, now that's brilliant. That is deep. And I'm going to stop brooding. I brooded about brooding now. It wasn't like, you know, a guy said I was 36 years in learning that all the people that I hated didn't feel it, and it was killing him. Is that profound? You betcha. I took that home, and I was going to stop hating. I hated the guy for saying it, you know. And I read this in the book, that we all have philosophical and moral convictions or principles galore. But when we tried to practice them, the necessary power wasn't there. I didn't know, what does that mean, you know? That didn't make sense in my life. Well, I decided I wasn't going to work the steps, and I would hit a bad spot at work, and I'd think, well, I ain't going to AA anymore. The steps don't work. The program don't work. And I went home, and Saturday, Pat, as if I didn't have enough trouble, made me mow the lawn. And I was pushing this old lawnmower, and it hit a tree root. And the handle was held down by a bolt, and that bolt hit me right there in the chest. And it was a killer. If you would like an experiment, get a ball peen hammer and have somebody whack you right there. Man, that hurts. And I immediately said, damn Pat. She wasn't even there, but that's what I always said when something went wrong. It was damn Pat. And damn AA too. If AA worked, would my chest hurt? No. AA don't work and I'm not going to the meeting. Well, I went to the meeting. I always went to the meeting, but at the time I wasn't going to go because it didn't work. And on the way to the meeting, we were talking, ain't this AA something? Isn't this great, you know? And we got there, and the guy by the name of Don Gates was the speaker. Don passed away years ago, but he was an appellant, a justice in the appellant court system when he passed away. And he said, if you're new in AA or if you're old and you're not working the steps, AA will stop being fun. And you'll decide that AA doesn't work and you're not going. He said, you don't go for a while, you'll go to the bar and order a drink. And when you do that, if the bartender said, what's the matter? I thought you was going to AA. Don't AA work? He said, if you're not working the steps, be honest with the bartender and tell him you don't know if AA worked or not because you didn't try AA. And there was nothing in my head to pop off at that. I knew that was the truth. And on the way home, I said to the guy who was taking me, I'm going to work the steps. Okay? Now, I know that's a surrender, but I didn't know it then. But I had this friend who was an actor in the movies, and I saw him Sunday at a meeting, and he had like a 1940s haircut. And I said, oh, you got a part. He said, I got a part with Redford and Paul Newman. It's called The Sting. And I got a talking part in it. And they just signed an agreement for residuals. And I'm telling you, this is a good thing for me. And he said, you going to Malibu tomorrow night? You're going to go to the Palisades tomorrow night? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm talking, so you should know that. Well, I went. Anyway, Archie would have come anyway for me, so I went for him. And that night he said, I was so busy this week wanting what I was getting that I didn't have time to worry about getting what I wanted. And I thought, I'd like to stick him in the eye with a sharp stick. Because that's the way I thought, you know. But I heard what he said. I knew that was profound. After the meeting was over, it was raining as hard as it can rain in the Pacific Palisades. And I ran to my car, and even though I got there quick, I was drenched to the skin. And I've hated the rain since I wiped out the wheat crop. And I ain't happy. I got in the car, and the voice, the reason I say the voice is I used to say the voice, and Clancy and I were doing a historical workshop, and I talked about hearing a voice, and afterwards he said, I want to talk to you, Howard. I want to say you did excellent research. That was a great topic. It was great because it didn't walk on his topic, and I knew not to do that. And, I mean, I ain't stupid. I know, anyway. He said, but you should know these two things. When we talk to God, we call that prayer. And when God talks to us, we call that schizophrenia. So I try to remember to say, if I say a voice, I will say, but it came to me like a thought. But sometimes I have thoughts that come to me like a voice. So the voice said, why don't you love the rain? Because it's going to rain anyway. That's what Will Rogers tried to tell us. That's what Mark Twain tried to tell us. That's what Archie tried to tell you today. In the now, love what's happening now, because that's what's happening anyway. And you're getting the best deal. The only thing you're not getting is your way. That's the only problem you've ever had, was you weren't having your way. Otherwise, you wouldn't have, well, you still wouldn't have been happy, because we just aren't happy as long as we aren't working the steps. I mean, it don't come to us without that. It didn't come to me without that. And so I was working the steps. I hadn't even started it really, but I had surrendered and said, I'm going to. That Monday night, I could love the rain. I went home, we had shingled roof, and I could hear the roof, and I loved it. And then when I woke, it was soothing, and when I woke up, it wasn't raining, and at first I didn't like it. And then I said, no, you gotta stay in the now and love it. Not, I don't care, that works, That takes, and the only way this kind of stuff happened when I look at it now is because I surrendered. I gave up my way. Did not know what the heck I was buying into. But I worked the steps. I surrendered. I'm an alcoholic. I surrendered. I lack the power to manage my life. Now, someplace along the line, I read the 12 and 12. Now, Bill Wilson wrote the 12 and 12 to deepen and broaden what he had written in the big book. And he said that. He had 15 years of sobriety, and he could see that many alcoholics worked the steps from the big book and from their sponsors, and got sober and stayed sober and remained angry, anxious, depressed, and filled with dread about their life long after the high tide of active alcoholism had receded. And so he deepened and broadened the steps with the 12 and 12. Except if, when you read the big book and then you read, it's two different, they just don't match. So I know that he was unsuccessful at deepening and broadening the steps. But I thought, I'll take a look at it from that point of view. Took me 2 sentences to see that none of us want to admit that we're personally powerless. Well, count me in there. I wouldn't mind admitting if I was perfectly powerless if I was, but I'm not. 3 paragraphs later it says, our admissions of our personal powerlessness becomes firm bedrock upon which we can build happy and productive lives. What are you doing with this personally powerless stuff, right? I'm not personally powerless. Now, I meditate by this time, and when I'm agitated or doubtful, I meditate. And I've scheduled time to meditate, and I was going to meditate on the fact that I doubt if I'm personally powerless. And in my meditation, I argue why I know I'm personally powerless. I have the power to decide to pick up this guy's telephone. Having decided, I have free will so that I can decide. Having decided, I can pick it up. I have power. If it was an anvil, I can't do it. But I have a lack of power powerless. My dilemma says so on page 45 in the big book. It's lack of power. It isn't powerlessness. I'm powerless over alcohol, but I am not personally powerless. Right there proves it. Then the thought came to me like a voice. And it said, okay, Howard, that's right. Now pick it up with your vision. Just levitate it up. Well, I don't have that power. Well, give yourself that power. Well, I can't give myself that power. No, and you did not give yourself the power to decide to pick it up with your hands, nor did you give yourself the power to pick it up with your hands, because you are personally powerless. Whatever power you have comes from some other source of power. If you would want to contemplate that for a little bit, make me a list of the times you have given yourself power. It will be a short list. Okay? Now you go back to the big book from the 12 and 12, and the big book says none of us will ever fully comprehend or define this power, which is God. But we should be open to the possible existence of a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. And then he describes the prosaic steel girder and how they're made up. And he does a sloppy job of it, but he makes his point. If you're surrendered, he makes the point. And the point is, these laws hold true throughout the material world. And you can prove that to yourself fairly easily with some hard work. And it says, science tells us so, and we have no reason to doubt it. And so I look at what science tells us, and it tells us that this universe started out 13.7 billion years ago, and as a undifferentiated energy. Dr. Einstein calls it spirit energy, but it's energy, and that was all there was, and it began to expand, cool, and evolve, and then particles took place, and forces of nature in the particles, and then stars, and then newer stars, and all, and pretty soon we are in a life-breathing universe, which is very, very improbable. But it started at the spirit energy, and the spirit energy has expanded and is in everything. I mean, I've convinced myself, and then Bill Wilson says, the perfectly logical assumption is, if it's underneath the material world, it's under life as you see it. Not just the biochemistry and physics of life, but the circumstances and events of life, and the character and quality of the circumstances and events. And we are part of that. If you become convinced of it, then you're at step 3. And now you know that you have defects of character that are shutting you off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Now, those other things are surrenders. Okay? Now you make a list of your resentments. You're making them. People have told you all your life you're messed up. You know, this is wrong with you and that's wrong with you. And you can't believe that. You're a fighter. You're spring-loaded to fight or flight. But if you've written it down yourself, there it is. Man, I didn't know I was that angry. I don't want to be that angry. On page 66 and 67, God help me show them the patience, tolerance, kindness, and love I would show a sick person. You know, by surrendering and asking for help. And it's that way with every step and every segment of every step. It brings us to see ourselves as we have never seen ourselves, as we look at ourselves, surrender and change. and I took the equipment back. Now, there was a surrender that went on there. I won't, I just tell you, miracle after miracle has happened in my life. And the guy I picked for my first sponsor had been a high school chum of the fence. So he found the equipment for me. And Pat and I went to the bank and borrowed money, and I took it back. And my boss said, I don't know where the equipment's been, but I know it wasn't stolen because I have it. But don't tell anybody. And I haven't up till tonight. And I know there's some new people here tonight, and I want to tell you, if you remember the feeling you had with your first drink, the next morning after I took the equipment back, that's the feeling I had when I woke up. And I didn't have that weight of that problem on me, which I argued it don't bother me, And I tell you, I had goosebumps just like having a drink out the back of my hand and up the back of my neck. And just like having a drink, it don't last. If 0 is the worst you can feel and 10 is the best, when we were drinking, we would start out, let's say, at a 2 and have a drink and go up to a 7. In a couple hours, you now have burned your nerves numb, and when the numbness wears off, you're worse shape than you were. So if you started at 2, you got to go down to, say, 1.75. Okay? When you take the equipment back, let's say by this time you're up to a 4. Then you go up to an 8. But then you come down. But you never go down lower than you started. You're always higher. Maybe it'll just be a 4.1. But it's always better over any considerable period of time. And Alcoholics Anonymous, working the steps. It gets better, never worse. Bad things happen. But if you learn to look for the good, and you come to believe in the good, that whenever there's suffering or something go wrong, this is the essential beginning of some greater goodness that can only happen in this mystical way. And I think that's true about the entire creation of the universe and the ongoing creation of the universe. And after we're through here, that's what happens after that. It's just the nature of the way the world works. And if you come to believe that, when your wife, who you love, has a stroke, as mine did in 2012, and when you go see her, she says, I don't want to live. I don't want to go on. And she looked like Jack Elam. I don't know if you guys ever saw Jack Elam, but her eyes were going off like this. She loved that explanation, that description. But she did. And she said, I don't want to go on. I won't be able to drive. I won't be able to go shopping. That's a tall pole in her tent. I won't be able to go shopping. And I said, Pat, I've been studying how the steps work, and it's called neuroplasticity. And when we went to school, they didn't teach that. But most of the data we get about neuroplasticity comes from stroke victims. And if you go to a therapist, they will help you work your way through the stroke. And I was just scared to death. And then she said to me, in a very short time, can you help me up? Well, the intellectual answer is, hell no, I can't help you up. You just had a stroke, and I don't have any business helping you up. You need therapists here to help you, but I went and got the walker. And I came in and I said, do you want to do this? And she said, I want to try. And she loves this part too. Snot was running and crying, and it was, and she had her head there. And I tell you, I felt wonderful. Not because I didn't want her to have to go through that, but I knew she was going to have, this was the beginning of some greater goodness that can only happen in this mystical way. And I was and am so glad that I found that through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and finding that that's the way my higher power works. I'm going to close telling you that I've read a bunch of books about meditation. By the way, if you're new and you want to know about meditation, read Step 11 of the 12 and 12. You can read the big book. The big books don't make a big deal about prayer and meditation. They just want you to pray and meditate through each of the 12 steps. And upon awakening, and in planning your day, and in facing indecisions, and as you go through the day when agitated or doubtful. About this matter of prayer, better men than you have been doing it constantly. Constantly is right up there with all the time. Thy will, not mine, be done. These are thoughts that must go with us constantly. We constantly remind ourselves we're no longer running the show. And upon retiring at night. Except for that, the big book don't make a big deal about prayer and meditation. But in the 12 and 12, it tells me how to meditate. And I've read a lot of ways, but that's the best way for me. And instead of going through the St. Francis of Assisi prayer, which, my not being a saint, probably wouldn't do me as much good as meditating through the steps. Being conscious of the deeper meaning of each word and phrase. And pausing between there and know, as Chuck C. described, that I have a personally satisfactory, conscious partnership with the God that created me in this entire business of living. Entire business of living. That's my partner. And I don't always know it. But I know it enough that that's the hub of my life. Reading the book on meditation, it says whatever way you find God, that's the right way for you. If you, just like my wife, feel the presence and know that the presence and power is there. Just know that. Or you can analyze the laws of physics. And you can study all of that and learn it. And then, once you know that intellectually, then you've got to bring it into your life spiritually, which you can't do intellectually. But if you work in the steps, you'll get surrenders, and then it'll come to you. Whatever how you find God, that's the right way for you. But remember, wherever you see God pass, mark that spot and go sit in that window again. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous is my window. That's where I came, and that's where I see God pass. And I thank you for that, and thank you for letting me share.